Good afternoon. I don't need to introduce myself because I was in the previous panel. So we're gaining some minutes to hear from this wonderful set of role models that we have invited for this conversation. I have to say that it's an honor to be here moderating you. We are going to try to learn from them in terms of their own careers, but I also think that we are going to learn from them in terms of their contributions to the things that they have chosen as their life paths, but also in terms of what would you say about your own parkour or your own development and the impact that it can have on girls and women. We know that role models matter. We know that whenever we see women that are successful in their own careers, it really inspires other women and inspire girls. I launched in Mexico a program that is STEM Niñas Pueden, because I just wanted to get women in science and engineering close to girls, and you could see the faces of the girls looking at an astronaut that is a woman, or a pilot that is a woman. So I'm so glad to be here with you. Let me introduce our speakers. We have, of course, Susana Balbo. Everybody knows Susana, because she has been leading the effort for the W20, and you can see what it means to have you all here and to have all this drive to put the gender agenda in the G20. She is the first female winemaker in Argentina and was awarded Women Entrepreneur of the Year by the Argentine Organization of Business Women in 1997. But she also has an amazing career in the Argentinian National Congress as National Deputy for the province of Mendoza. That's when I met you. But in order to fully focus on the work of the G20 and its chair, she resigned this position, and she put all of the efforts to get into the W20. And you know, that was worth the battle, because now the G20 of Argentina has mainstream everywhere the question of gender. We also have Michelle Beckering. Michelle, great to have you here. She joined the USAID, the institution in the US that focuses on providing development finance and development impact. In 2017, she serves as a Senior Deputy Assistant Administrator of the Bureau of Economic Growth, Education and Environment, and also a Senior Coordinator for Gender Equality for Women Empowerment. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
Then we have Irma Gries. She's currently a member of the Austrian Parliament, and she served as the first female president of the Austrian Supreme Court. In 2016, she was an independent candidate in the Austrian presidential election. And then, of course, my dear friend, Svetlana Lukács, Lana, as we know him, and as we know her in the Sherpa world. So great to have her here today. She was leading the Russian presidency of the G20, and I think you really deliver big in many ways on that front. But you have also overseen the preparation of 12 G20 summits, and I have to say that Svetlana was also one of the first that was very supportive of the gender agenda. I remember going to St. Petersburg and being there, not easy task, but it was really a great issue. So just to start, and of course we work together to get the 25 by 25, the gender target, and we know that we need to upscale the efforts. But to start, I just want you to share with the public, and we go this way. How did you get to arrive where you are? What lessons would you bring forward for other women? And what makes you proud? Just share it with them.
Buenos dias. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Yes, you see, I grew up on a farm, and I saw how hard the life of the women was, especially of my mother and also of other farmers' wives. And they had little money and very hard work. And so I thought it's necessary to become independent, self-reliant. And the key to it, I realized very early, is higher education, just education. And therefore, I tried to get it, and in my family, I was the first one to go to university. And the second very important step to realize how important gender equality is was when I came across the book of Simone de Beauvoir, Le deuxième sexe, the second sex, and it's really an eye-opener. For me, it was. It was published 1949, but it's by no means outdated. It's still up to date, and I really can strongly recommend it to everybody, especially to young women to read it. So I became aware of the gender question and what is necessary to empower women, that we have the same qualities as men. We have just to use them. So that was, very short, my way to become aware of it.
And you are really in one of the areas that are so complex. The Congress and the justice sector. I remember when my country got this target in the Congress, and we were hearing gender target for Congress. We're going to be full of incompetent women. And I said, we're full of incompetent men without a quota. So
Yeah.
no difference whatsoever. Susana.
For a start, I will apologize for not answering in English.
Ah, bueno, pero estamos
in
en tu
English
casa.
because the audience is asking for more Spanish. So apologies for my colleagues in the. Bueno, la verdad que yo crecí en una familia muy tradicional, de origen italiano, donde la hija menor no tiene voz ni voto, así que yo quería tener voz y voto. Y exactamente como Ingrid, era una ávida lectora desde muy pequeña y me he criado en un colegio de monjas y normalmente me censuraban los libros que yo leía. O sea que cuando se enteraban que estaba leyendo libros, me los sacaban y me daban otros y yo leía escondida los libros que quería leer. Y tuve mucha conciencia de la importancia de la independencia económica de la mujer desde muy chiquita. Y siempre dije, voy a trabajar, voy a ser independiente, voy a estudiar. Y así es como comencé un camino que no tiene retorno. Cuando entiendes que la independencia es lo que te permite ser libre, fue un camino sin retorno para mí. Y luego, a lo largo de mi vida, me he dado cuenta de lo importante que es ayudar a otras mujeres para poder hacer lo mismo que yo pude obtener, que he tenido mucha suerte, mucha ayuda por parte de toda la gente que me ha rodeado, también incluso de mi familia. Y bueno, pienso que es un camino de ayudar a muchas más mujeres para que puedan lograr lo que yo pude lograr.
Genial. Muchas gracias. Lana.
Thank you. Well, actually, I'm really humbled to be here because I think myself as a beginner on the way that you already paved towards gender equality. And once I was never on this side. I didn't believe there was inequalities. I grew up in rather comfortable circumstances and with equal access to education, work, and common goods. And it was only until I started to deal with multilateral cooperation and work with the G20 when I started to notice that things are different. Definitely, it's paraphrasing Socrates, the more you learn, the more you understand that you know nothing. So it happened once in 2014. I was at the annual ambassadors meeting in Mexico, and I suddenly noticed that half of the audience, comprised only of ambassadors and consuls, were women. In my country, there was at that time only one woman ambassador, and now it's just up to 5. So I started to understand women politicians, economists, civil society activists who advocated for women's rights. And I started to understand that they are right. And I started to notice inequalities, be it a glass ceiling or a gender pay gap, or just inability to get a credit from a bank. And that path brought me here today. I'm really, on this way, and I'm really going to stand for gender equality forward. I believe that none of us is equal until everyone is equal.
Great. Thank you, Lana.
Well, first of all, thank you, Gabriela, and let me say what an honor it is to be on the stage with these fellow leaders. And I do, again, want to thank Susanna for the great work she has done this year and for such a successful summit. I thought it was interesting, Irmgard, to hear your story because it is rather similar to my own. I grew up in a rural Iowa, which is in the middle of the United States, and I grew up on a working farm. And it was a very difficult, as you mentioned, farm life is very difficult, and I was delighted that this week we have attention to rural communities. And so I grew up in a very loving family, but really, we had no social connections. We did not have a lot of money. My parents worked very long hours and also had to work outside of the home and other jobs to make ends meet. But from a young age, what I think set my story apart from so many other women around the world was that even I had two brothers, never once was I made to feel that I was less equal or had less opportunities than my brothers. And one of my greatest role models was actually my grandmother. My grandmother only went to school until the age of 12, and then she dropped out because, like so many girls around the world, she had to stay home and help care for her younger brother, but also her mother, who was ill. But I never knew that about my grandmother until I was an adult. What I knew of my grandmother was that she was a fierce leader, she was a community activist, she was very politically involved. So from a young age, I witnessed her as a role model, and I just assumed that this was how every woman was. And I saw other men as well, and this was many years ago, take her very seriously and listen to her opinions. And I watched her create change in our community. And that was so powerful to me, and I was often struck the older I got and the work that I've now done around the world, and I've worked in every region of the world on women's empowerment and equality. And I'm so struck by that privilege I had of strong role models who always made me feel that I was just as important, and how that really changed my trajectory. And you said, what is your greatest privilege? And I have to say, it's to be in the line of work I am. I wake up every day and I am so excited to have a job, to have a position where I get to directly work with women all across the world and be a part of their own journey to leadership. And I think it's a great privilege, and it's also a great responsibility for women like us to give back.
And I have to say that you have heard, was not by chance that we have the public sector, the private sector, the Sherpa, and the international finance together, because each one of them, of course, are successful in their own career. But what I admire about all of you is that you speak about women, because many times when you have very successful women on the top, the less they want to do is to talk about gender issues, because, of course, I'm arriving because I'm very intelligent, or because why should I care about it? I think we should all talk about gender issues no matter where we are. And I completely agree also that it's unveiling. Okay. It's true. It's true. And if they ask you, you just don't be shy. Don't be shy. I think that sometimes we feel like, no, there are topics that are no. Let's just talk about it and be so proud as they are. Let's go into more of the deep discussions that we need to achieve in the G20 and the W20. Lana, you and I have been trying to push this agenda since ever, of course, in my role as international institutions with the evidence, in your role with the political clout. What do you think that the G20 should be stepping up to really deliver on this agenda?
Thank you. Let me first of all refer also to Simone de Beauvoir, who's also I admire. She said that a woman will never be that independent if she doesn't have a work, and only work guarantees her real freedom. So definitely the core G20 topic should stay labor inclusion. And we have a great commitment adopted in 2014 to decrease the gender participation gap in the labor markets by 25% till 2025. It hits two targets. Indeed, first, gender inequality, but the second is more pragmatic. It ensures global growth. So much has been done since then. Indeed, many countries adopted strategies and programs to increase women economic participation. But what is still missing, and what is the biggest problem, is the quality of those jobs. So if we really want to have strong growth, we need equality employment. Well, it's obvious. A woman spends more time on unpaid homework, on child care, and she has less time to obtain new skills and to look for the better job in the formal sector. So it leads to lower remuneration and pensions levels, to poor social protection, and, well, absence from decision-making and many more. What does it mean? It means less productivity for economy. So again, quality of employment is the core thing that G20 should focus on. I would emphasize 3 areas that also been discussed this year by the W20. So first, measures that can help women to combine homework and her professional work in the, well, preferably indeed in the formal sector. That's all about childcare, about sharing burden between men and women and families. And that's what the W20 produced very good commitments this year, recommendations. Second area indeed is about discrimination and stereotypes. It's all about gender pay gap, it's about glass ceilings, it's also about behavioral and cultural changes in the economies and societies. And third group of measures is about how to, push forward our development, how to help women to become entrepreneurs. It's about education and skills. It's about financial inclusion and digital literacy. If you would ask me just one thing that would help implement all G20 commitments, I would stand for education. That is indeed.
Yeah.
That is the key. That is the key to any door.
Yep.
A key to any door, the key to self-development and development of our societies. And finally, what really Women 20 needs more to focus on? Not only recommendations. Well, thanks for these recommendations. We will, as Sherpas, take them into account. We heard you. But what you need to do is make us accountable. Make policymakers implement their commitments. Focus more on that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Totally. Totally. I think that this is the question, the commitment, but then the action. And she gave us just a roadmap for gender equality.
Yes.
Susanna, tell us about, because it's true that education, employment, all these areas that Lana has just been touching upon, each one has a very specific angle to be addressed. But one of the most difficult is the entrepreneurship.
Yes.
Access to finance,
Yes.
role models, balance between housework and even the ability to negotiate, the ability to set prices, the ability. How have you managed? Because it's very easy to say the winemaker, the first women winemaker of that's fantastic. But how did you manage all these obstacles and burden for you to succeed?
Bueno, fue una forma de organizar mi vida muy ordenadamente, perdón por la redundancia, pero tenía mi vida organizada de una manera en que cuando mis hijos eran muy pequeños los llevaba conmigo a la bodega. Tengo anécdotas de amigos que me contaban, me acuerdo de José durmiendo debajo del escritorio tuyo arriba de una frazada y Anita durmiendo en la sillita. Y bueno, los llevaba hasta que empezaron el colegio. Cuando empezaron el colegio, me organizaba que los dejaba en el colegio en la mañana. Yo trabajaba en los 8 horas corridas, iban a colegio bilingüe para poder darle habilidades que yo no había tenido. Y entonces yo tenía mi jornada de trabajo y cuando volvíamos les decía, bueno, ahora ustedes hacen sus deberes mientras mamá termina los de ella. Y después comíamos a las 8 de la noche, 9 de la noche, todo el mundo durmiendo y a las 6 de la mañana todo el mundo despierto. Mucha disciplina, mucho trabajo, mucha organización y mucho amor a tus hijos en los momentos que estás con ellos.
Es fantástico porque además tuvo mucho éxito en una de las áreas más difíciles de la economía y pues obviamente de internacionalizar la producción, ¿no?
Sí, gracias.
Tú, Imkar, Quizás otra de las áreas en donde realmente estamos behind, and now I'm speaking Spanish.
That's difficult for me.
Bueno, estamos en Argentina, ¿no? But you understand Spanish? No, she doesn't, and she doesn't tell me. Why don't you tell me? Okay, no, I'm sorry. The fact
Sorry,
is that, no,
it's
it's
my
great,
fault.
it's great. We love Argentina, so it's okay. But no, I was touching upon what Susana was mentioning in terms of how each woman has to build their own capabilities to move the business agenda and the family agenda. You are also in a position where women are really underrepresented. And we know it, Lana. How many leaders are around the table? I mean, it's very few that are women. How you have managed also to advance in your political career in the justice sector that is another world dominated by male? So how have you advanced your own parkour and what can we learn from it?
It's not anymore dominated by men. It was so when I started. You see, the first female judge in Austria was appointed in 1947. And in the province where I grew up, the first female judge was appointed in the 70s, so rather late. But then it was a very fast development, and nowadays, about 80% of the trainee judges are women. You see? And when I was appointed at the Supreme Court in 1993, less than 10% of the judges were women. Nowadays, about between 20 and 30% are female justices. I was appointed the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Now there's again a female Chief Justice. She was appointed this year. In between there was a man again. So that has changed. The judiciary for women has some advantages because you are very flexible in your work. So it's easier to combine job and career. So that's an advantage. On the other hand, of course, you have a lot of self-discipline because you have to do your work. You are your own boss. Beginning with the first day, you bear full responsibility. That's also what made this profession so attractive for me. But you have to work very hard. And I think what's a very positive development in our judiciary is that it's very important now, and people are aware of it, how important judicial ethics is. I think a judge has to have legal skills. It goes without saying. But equally important are judicial ethics, because judges have such a huge, great responsibility,
Yes.
and it's so necessary for society that we have courts people trust. And there is no democracy without the rule of law. The democracy, and especially a liberal democracy, is based on the rule of law. And courts are only as good as the judges who work there. And nowadays we have very able judges, female judges, and it's a good atmosphere in courts, and courts are trustworthy. And I think it's really a good development. But everything has also its disadvantages. The judiciary is a profession now which is in danger of being feminized. You see, like teaching, yeah? And I think the courts need both sexes. They need men and women, women and men, because there are different experiences which are necessary to be a good judge. And though we have to do everything to make judgeship again attractive for men, because we need the best men and the best women to be good judges.
Very good.
Yeah. It's very interesting, Irma, because when we were developing the gender strategy in the OECD, the Nordic countries were saying, what about boys? Boys are lagging behind. And when you say that in the political office you have advanced a lot, we take our hat off for Austria.
Yeah.
Not for Mexico, not for Argentina, not for Russia. So I think that we need to learn also from the experiences of countries like yours, but there's still a long way to go, and I completely agree with you. The gender lenses on the justice and the access to justice is very important. Let me finish with Michelle. I really like the way you put the fact that you are so, you feel privileged to be in the position you are. We put the trust on you. Because the reality is that one thing is to talk about our own situation, one thing is to talk about the challenges that we're facing, even in the G20 countries. Another thing is to deal with the most egregious features of aggressions against girls, violence against women, development cooperation to try to address those issues. In countries where violence might be justified and where child marriage might be the rule of the game. So how have you addressed those issues in your own policies, and what makes you proud? How can we ensure that every single girl, every single woman around the world enjoys the same human rights?
No, thank you. And it's a great question, and I think it's something that concerns all of us in this field. I mean, we know the very high levels of gender-based violence. We've talked about the terrible statistics of how many young girls, are being married before their 15th birthday. And I think to go to your question, it's, I always think of this illustrative example that in an agency like USAID, which is focused on development and empowerment and equality, the leaves of a tree, the leaves that you want to grow, really depend on that trunk of the tree being healthy and being strong. And so at USAID, not only do we focus on programs overseas that specifically have, let's say, gender interventions, where we're working with women entrepreneurs, where we're, teaching girls to read. But what we have also done is stepped back and said, does our agency itself, is the way that we're organized, the way that we develop programs, the way that we distribute our funding, is it making sure that we take in what we call the whole of the girl or the whole of the women approach? Are we recognizing that the barriers are so multifaceted so that when we're looking at economically empowering a woman, we have to be very conscious of gender-based violence that may be present in her life? We have to be conscious of what the social constraints are, what her society says about her abilities. And then the other thing is to make sure as well, when we're talking about development writ large, it can't just be gender to the side. Gender is one core. In my job as Senior Gender Coordinator at USAID, I am really tasked with making sure that gender is actually the core of every single development program we do throughout the agency. And that's really striking when you consider we're in 80 countries around the world. So every program we do actually has to be shaped by what we call a gender analysis. We actually require all of our bureaus and our missions to have a gender advisor. Someone who is there bringing up these issues and saying, but have you thought about gender-based violence? But have you thought of education, et cetera? And making sure it's woven into everything we do, because that is where you're going to meet the goals. And I would also say it's just recognizing that is important. And I think to Irmgard, to your point about justice and how important that is, when we're talking about gender-based violence, we also have to recognize that there's a really important role we need to play in both prevention as well as response. So at our agency, when we're looking at gender-based violence as a core, what we're looking at is, first of all, how do we stop it from happening in the first place? And that involves talking to men, talking to boys, trying to change that social stigma. But what it's also very important is working with the public sector, working with government policymakers to make sure that there are social safety nets for women. Will their perpetrators of this violence actually be held accountable? Do laws criminalize it? And then most importantly, let's make sure we remember these women are victims, and make sure that we have health care for them, that they have economic opportunities, that they can also survive and thrive after these situations happen.
Thank you so much, and we're so proud you're doing that. We have come to the end of the panel. I said that I was privileged to moderate. I did not moderate anything. I just get the best out of these fantastic experiences. I have to say that each one of you put the emphasis on providing women with the independence, the self-awareness, the agency to thrive in the world of work, in the life in general. And I think that this is a great conclusion for the W20. I just want to say congratulations, Susana.
Thank you.
Congratulations to all of you. You can pick up all these pieces of experience that we got in this panel and bring it over to the leaders because they will need it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.